At the beginning of this year, I moved out of home for the first time. The apartment was small but clean, and well furnished with everything a student could want. The morning commute was long, but the low rent and apparent safeness of the neighbourhood more than made up for the extra time it took me to get to uni. My apartment was situated in a large 4-storey house that had been sectioned into 8 individual flats. Why they took me on as a tenant, I'll never understand, as all other inhabitants were considerably older. I didn't dwell on that though. Why look a gift horse in the mouth? My neighbour was a woman called Ethel. She was a widow who had lost her husband in some sort of industrial accident almost 20 years prior. She was lonely, and compensated that with cats. Not 1 or 2, mind. She must have had at least 30. I didn't care. Well, to be honest, I was a cat person. They were always well fed and well groomed, and friendly. Now that I think about it, almost oddly so. Cats in general are meant to be standoffish creatures. One moment you have their love and affection, the next they've torn up the side of your face for no apparent reason. These cats, however, were never like that. Someone once told me never to trust a smiling cat. Is that Alice in Wonderland reference? I'm not sure. Anyway, Ethel was lovely. I wasn't home much, but whenever I was, she'd call me and invite me in to have some tea. Now I know what you're thinking. Old woman who can't move around so well, large amount of pets, her apartment equals pigsty. On the contrary, it was clean as a shiny new pin. Almost too clean. I always assumed she must have a cleaner in a few times of the week. With that many cats, vacuuming must be hell. She would babble on about Henry, or something she'd done when she was young and spry, and I'd entertain various cats, more interested in them than I was her. Then, I stopped hearing from her. I assumed she lost interest in me, but then the stench began. I thought of one of those cats must have died somewhere, out of sight, and called the landlord. However, upon further inspection, the smell seemed to be coming from Ethel's apartment. I immediately thought the worst. I think we both knew she was dead. The landlord used his spare key to open the door, and what I saw in that room will haunt me for the rest of my life. There were cats everywhere, on the floor, on the sofa, on the table, on the top of the television, on the plant pots, on her bookshelf, and the windowsill. That in itself was odd. She was a cat lady, of course, but they would be everywhere. It was how they were stood that got me. And by stood, I mean stood. All of them on their hind legs, blankly staring towards Ethel's room. Their front paws limply hanging by their sides. The landlord and I didn't want to go inside, but we had to. We had to find Ethel. Confirm our suspicions, if you will. Walking through her lounge and down the long, narrow hall was the most awful yet fascinating minute of my life. We found her as we knew we would. Not willing to spend any more time with the corpse, we exited the apartment and called the police. I remember when I locked the door, they finally moved. They turned, slowly, to look at me, unblinking, dazed. They stood and stared. I closed the door as firmly as I could, without making a sound. Somehow, I knew they wouldn't like that. When the police arrived, all of the cats were gone. They must have slipped out the window or something. I gave my statement for some reason, I left out the part with the cats. The whole thing felt so surreal, even though I was certain it happened, and I knew they wouldn't believe me. The officer in charge of the case was perplexed as to how her body came to be in her bedroom, and questioned myself and my landlord as to whether we moved her. I think when he saw the genuine shock on both our faces, he realized we didn't know. All evidence indicated she fell in the kitchen and broke her hip, accidentally impaling herself on a small kitchen knife when she did so. She died on that linoleum floor. So how she wound up in the bedroom remains a mystery. To some at least. After this incident, I decided to move back with my mum. And honestly, I don't think I would have ever written this if it hadn't happened. Yesterday is when my cat started standing.